Imagine that you're an English monk based in a monastery in Lindisfarne on the 8th of June 793 AD. One misty morning, you venture out of the convent and head down to the seafront for a brisk walk before the mass service commences. The ocean is ominously still, showing not even a hint of a wave or swell. Out of the corner of your eye, you notice a sharp object slicing effortlessly through the thick fog, approaching land at a rapid rate. You hear the distant roar of men, accompanied by metronomic claps and the constant banging of swords against shields. Suddenly, the smog disperses to reveal a long wooden boat, with the prow of the ship depicting a snake and a tall figure looming over the bow. This man stands around 6'5", possessing long blonde hair and a sturdy frame. Despite his face being concealed behind a dark metal helmet, you notice his razor blue eyes, which are unwaveringly fixated on you. He leaps from the boat into the shallow water, charging towards the coastal settlement with a sharpened axe raised. His fellow comrades follow suit, bellowing in rage as they repeatedly slam their swords against rounded shields. The ruthless Vikings have arrived on the world stage. I want to introduce you to the Sagas of Icelanders, a collection of narrative prose based on historical events that took place in Iceland during the 9th, 10th and early 11th centuries. This script is a valuable source in depicting medieval Scandinavian societies and how the concept of strength was an inherent part of the Vikings' culture. The saga mentions Orm Sturlufsson, a Viking strongman who is documented to have carried the mast of Ormbrinn Langi on his shoulders. This mast weighs 650 kilograms and, according to legend, it took some 50 men to place the ship's mast on his shoulders. Almost 1,000 years later, Hafthor Bjornsson replicated this feat, lifting the mast for 5 steps, showcasing the fact that the strength of Vikings and their descendants has never wavered. But why were the Vikings able to perform such incredible feats of strength? Well, this can be attributed to a variety of factors. When medieval writers from Europe and other lands wrote about the frightening Norse raiders, they frequently mentioned that the invading Vikings were very tall. In 921, an Arab named Ibn Fadlan encountered a people called the Russ, a group of Swedish origin who were acting as traders in the Bulgar capital. Fadlan's journal stated, "I have seen the Russ as they came on their merchant journeys and encamped by the Volga. I have never seen more perfect physical specimens, tall as date palms, blonde and ruddy." European observers made similar observations. The Annals of Fulda record that in 884 the Franks defeated a party of attacking Vikings in a battle in Saxony. It constantly mentions the Northmen's beauty and the size of their bodies. But do these anecdotal reports accurately reflect the reality? Well, an archaeologist called Richard Steckel recently conducted an in-depth study on adult male skeletons from the period. As you can see, those of Scandinavian origin tended to be slightly taller than their British counterparts, as well as those in Central Europe, where many of the raids were carried out. Fast forward 1,000 years later, and the height gene remains prevalent in Scandinavian and Northern European countries. However, being taller doesn't necessarily equate to an increase in strength, unless you take full advantage of it. The Vikings' larger skeletons benefited them in absolute strength terms, as their lifestyle involved lifting heavy tools whilst farming, chopping down trees for shipbuilding, and extensive rowing. The combination of their larger than average frames and active lifestyle enabled Vikings to pack on muscle and grow stronger than others around Europe in the period. Perhaps the best representation of the link between height and strength potential is the history of strongman competitors who tend to be very tall. The previously mentioned Hafthor Bjornsson stands around 6'9" and weighs 152 kilograms. The 4-time winner of the competition, John Paul Sigmarsson, stood around 6'4", and Magnus Ver Magnusson is 6'3". These 3 figures represent modern-day Vikings demonstrating incredible strength through utilising their massive frames. So we've worked out that Vikings and their descendants tend to be both tall and strong. But aside from the general lifestyle, I've given very little explanation as to why this was and still is the case. Well, protein has been a massive staple of the Scandinavian diet throughout all of history. Vikings routinely ate beef, goat, pork, mutton, lamb and chicken, along with all kinds of fish, as many of them lived on the coast. In comparison, the French and English people enjoyed higher carb-focused diets made up of huge harvests of grain. With inland populations having less access to fish and the nobles aggressively discouraging peasants from hunting, these people had less food diversity than their Scandinavian counterparts. This meant more susceptibility to famine on occasion and a much lower protein diet overall. There are many scientific studies that highlight the correlation between eating a high protein diet during childhood years and growing taller up to adulthood. Consequently, the Vikings' protein-based diet would have been hugely beneficial in raising taller offspring and building the requisite muscle needed for farming, rowing and plundering. But the Vikings didn't simply need brute strength to successfully carry out many of these raids on settlements across Europe. Speed and power was also essential in preventing the armies and local militia from responding in time. Protein was a valuable tool for equipping Vikings with these traits. An excellent modern day example of this is perhaps Manchester City's Erling Haaland. The Norwegian is clearly of Viking descent, and he attributes his size, pace and power heavily to his diet. This consists mainly of cow heart and liver, sea bass, tuna and swordfish. Having followed a protein-heavy diet as a kid, this has arguably provided him with the best possible chance to excel in a physical contact sport like football, growing to 6'4" and boasting substantial muscle mass. Ultimately, the Vikings were ahead of their time in their commitment to regular animal-based protein sources, and this culture has transcended down the generations to fully ensure that Scandinavians remain as some of the strongest and tallest people on the planet. The final point worth mentioning in explaining the height and strength of Vikings is natural selection. The Viking economy was heavily dependent upon regular raids of coastal towns and cities across Europe and the world. These campaigns would be fairly dangerous and led to the death of a sizable number of Vikings. Being taller and stronger provides an obvious advantage in combat settings, meaning that those equipped with these traits were far more likely to survive and reproduce, both at home and abroad. So this can also provide a decent explanation of why many Viking descendants excel in the strongman and contact sports categories. The Swedish MMA fighter Alexander Gustafsson is a great example of someone who likely has Viking DNA and thrives in a combat sports setting. Therefore, the brutality of Viking society bred tougher offspring throughout the ages. If you enjoyed this video breaking down the characteristics of Vikings and their descendants, please drop this video a like and subscribe, as I plan on making similar content for you guys in the future.